So yes, good evening, everyone. This is a meeting of the East Herts District Council Development Management Committee taking place on Wednesday, the 8th of March, 2023. Just going to go straight to the agenda. In the formal sense, we have no apologies, but one member of the committee has phoned me to say that I think for weather reasons he's stuck in traffic. If he doesn't make it, that will be the reason why. That's Councillor Rishi Fernando. And it may be that Ian Kemp knows a bit about that traffic because you come from the same neck of the woods, haven't you, Ian? So yeah. So that's Rishi. Item 2 is chairman's announcements. Looking in all directions, I have no chairman's announcements. Thank you very much. Item 3, declarations of interest. If anybody's got an interest they want to declare. No. Item 4, planning applications. So for those of you who've got a pack, we turn to page 10, and the description of this application is slightly lengthy, so bear with me, I shall read it out. So we are about to consider application 321-0498 FUL, Barn 1, offers accommodation and 6 units of overnight accommodation with 14 beds in total for staff, volunteers and students working on the farm site, Class EG. Barn 2 to 12, Barn 2, 12 self-contained holiday lodges, outbuilding for shower and laundry facilities, Class C3, but occupation restricted to short stays only. Barn 3, 3 retail workshops, Class EA, EG. Barn 4, learning and meeting event space with kitchen and 2 offices at first floor, Class F1A, F2B and Class EG. Erection of 3 dwellings, Class C3. Widening of access and footpath and associated car parking. Provision at Church Farm, or car parking provision at Church Farm, Moor Green Road, Ardley, Stevenage, Hertfordshire. I'm going to ask the relevant planning officer, who is Steve Fraser-Lim, to present this to us, please. Steve, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So on the slide here we have the site, which is within the village of Ardley, just to the south of Moor Green Road. And you can see sort of it was originally a sort of farmyard, and there's a number of sort of diverse kind of uses that have been introduced onto the site over time. We've got the sort of Church Farm shop and cafe at the sort of site entrance to the top, and then a number of other businesses, including sort of offices, retail, hairdressers, and so on in some of the sort of buildings further down. If we could have next slide, please. This is just the application site sort of red line area, and you can see the red line does just go around the kind of farmyard area, not the whole farm itself. Next slide, please. And this is the sort of view from Moor Green Road, the main vehicle access into the farm. Next slide, please. And this is the sort of existing cafe and shop that's on site. It's actually just outside the red line area, and so it's not actually included in the application, but I'll just included it here for kind of info, really. Next slide, please. And then sort of another view around that kind of cafe shop area. Next slide. And this is a sort of vehicle access that runs around the back of the farm shop, down into the main farm site. Next slide, please. And then now we've just got some views around the site, and there's a number of different sort of buildings, kind of ad hoc kind of development over time. There's some hard standing, there's some sort of bare ground areas used for car parking, although it's not sort of properly necessarily marked out. This view is looking north from within the site, looking up towards Moor Green Road and the shop. Next slide, please. And then sort of similar location, but looking northeast. So yeah, you can see, you know, a range of different sort of buildings existing on site, porter cabins, or, you know, caravans that are on site there, used for accommodation. And you can see in the planning history section of the report, those of got a certificate of lawfulness for, to stay on site for residential use. At the top end there, you can see some of the sort of nearest houses that front Moor Green Road, adjacent to the site. Next slide, please. And these are some of the buildings that are on site, currently used as offices for one of the sort of biggest companies that operates out of the site, which is Motive Action. Next slide, please. And again, this is looking looking more towards the west. Next slide, please. And then looking eastwards. Next slide, please. And then these are some views from sort of further afield from around the site. So this is the junction of Moor Green Road and School Lane, looking towards the site. Some of those houses in the foreground are kind of adjacent to it, and so it would sort of be behind those buildings there. Next slide, please. And then this is a view from School Lane looking eastwards towards the site. This is a sort of bottom area of the site where the residential houses will be located. I'll sort of explain that in a bit more detail. And I think another thing to note here is that sort of big tree on the right is mentioned in the committee report. That's in an area of open space, which is part of the school grounds. It's outside of the site, but kind of quite close to the boundary. And I'll kind of explain the kind of issues around that a bit later on. Next slide, please. And again, another view from School Lane, looking, there's that tree again, and then the site sort of, you can see behind that. Next slide. This is the southern boundary along the site. So there's a bridleway that sort of goes down that from this sort of vehicle turning car parking area. And the site boundary is on the left, sort of behind that, those hedgerow. Next slide, please. And then this is just a longer distance view from the south within the farm. And the farm buildings are sort of behind those trees that you can. You've got a sort of belt of trees that have been planted on the farm, and the farm site itself is kind of behind those trees there. There's a crescent of houses at the sort of southwest corner of the site, and you can just about see those sort of sticking up there. Next slide, please. So this is the application proposals. So all those existing buildings that we saw they're proposed to be demolished, and a number of different new barn style buildings are proposed. And there's because the existing uses, there's quite a sort of range of uses on site at the moment. The intention is that they will be reaccommodated or that they can be reaccommodated in some of these new buildings. So there's quite a sort of mix of buildings and uses going on. So you can see here that's that sort of main vehicle entrance, and then as you come into the site, the first building is Barn 1, which will have the farm reception and office spaces. The intention is that they can also be kind of available for booking by the community or as kind of work from home spaces as well. And that's on the ground floor of Barn 1. And then on the first floor, there is visitor, volunteer and sort of staff accommodation for the farm or the farm related businesses that or charities that are operating there. Actually, I should have mentioned one of the other organisations which operates from here is Rural Care, which is a sort of agricultural based charity, and they do work with people with learning disabilities and volunteers or people looking to sort of get experience in the agricultural sector. So they are they'll also be able to use or taking up some of the sort of office space in these buildings. So that's Barn 1 there, and also with the longer stay visitor accommodation. Well, it's more for sort of staff and volunteers, people who typically would currently be using the caravans. Would be new sort of fit for purpose accommodation. And Barn 2 is sort of down here. This is the holiday let accommodation. So 12 sort of units, and then just adjacent to that is a sort of toilet shower block. for use, will serve the holiday accommodation and the other uses on the site. Barn 3 is here, and that's intended to be retail workshop use. So there's a number of sort of retail workshop type uses currently on site. So they'd be able to be re-provided in this building. And then Barn 4 is also some further office accommodation. Number of car parking spaces provided, including electric vehicle charging points for a number of the spaces. And then at the back of the site, we have the kind of 3 residential units and some further car parking. So in terms of some of the planning issues that have arisen, there's quite a sort of comprehensive redevelopment of the site. One of the most relevant policies in terms of that is GBR2. So the intention of the proposals is to kind of consolidate the existing uses in kind of new fit for purpose buildings, more energy efficient, more attractive. So in terms of the kind of GBR2, we feel it's broadly in accordance with that policy around kind of supporting the rural economy. One of the main sort of issues is, though, in terms of sort of delivering the scheme, there's also the sort of residential accommodation, new houses at the back here. This is a bit more of a sort of contentious aspect of the scheme. I think in our committee report, we've identified that because Ardleigh is a category 3 village in the rural area beyond the green belt, it's not the sort of location where new housing would normally be acceptable. So we've identified some conflict with that policy there, although you can see also in the report, we've had to take into account the tilted balance in terms of the sort of council's 5-year housing land supply. And also we feel it is a bit of an unusual case in Ardleigh because this development does also have employment floor space with it. So so it does have jobs on site. There are also actually some facilities in the village, for instance, a sort of pub just up here. You've got the school, the farm shop, and so it is a bit more. Whilst it is a category 3 village, it is it is accessible to a number of services. So you can see in the report we felt that that's another factor in terms of how in terms of the housing being acceptable. You can also see some of the other sort of comments that were raised during the application, some concern around kind of the numbers of visitors coming into the village from the holiday accommodation. And so the nearest sort of residential is in this sort of location here, and they were raising concerns about people spilling out from the holiday accommodation here. We do note those concerns, but the view was that sort of level of separation was still quite significant, and so it will be a managed site. So we felt that wasn't going to be be resulting in too much noise nuisance. And then on the northern side here, I just mentioned about the tree. The tree is sort of close to the boundary there. We felt the condition of the tree, or the tree report considers the condition of that tree to be improved because of the removal of hard standing in the application site. So it would actually improve the long-term future for that tree. In terms of sort of design as well, you can see there is a small decrease in floor space. There's a decrease in building footprint compared to existing. There's also more kind of areas of soft landscaping, and in terms of design, we feel it is a significant improvement on the appearance of the site. I'll just show. If we could have next slide, please. These are sort of some of the images of the new barn building. So the intention is, that it would be a, kind of barn style architecture with these kind of pitched roofs. Next slide, please. That's barn 1 there. And then you've got the sort of courtyard space created around barn 1, 2, and 1, 3, and 4. Next slide, please. Again, next slide, please. Barn 4 there. Next slide, please. And those are the houses. Next slide, please. And this is a sort of kind of kind of high level view. A thing to point out here is it does show the sort of 5 houses in the background, or 6 houses rather. So that was as originally submitted, and the proposals have been revised. So the number of houses has been reduced from 6 to 3. It just gives you a bit of a sort of an overall kind of view of the site. So I mean, just to sum up really, in terms, we feel it does improve the appearance of the site. It does support the rural economy by providing new fit for purpose accommodation for the businesses that are on site. There is a sort of certain element of kind of farm diversification and some new uses, for instance, the holiday lets. But we feel that's generally also in accordance with policy GBR2 and also the holiday accommodation policy, I think it's HOU5. We have identified that conflict in terms of policy Bill 3 with regard to the new housing on site, and we feel that, but that's outweighed by those other considerations that we've identified. And then in all other respects, we feel it does accord with the development plan. I suppose, one other area perhaps I didn't mention much is around transport, but in terms of sort of numbers of car parking spaces, it does provide what's required by our policies. In terms of the sort of visitor movement of vehicle movements into and out of the site, the transport assessments predicting that there would be less vehicle movements than existing because there's a reduction in floor space. Although that has been disputed by some of the objectors, but certainly there's not going to be certainly the sort of highway authority advises it's not going to be it's acceptable in terms of highway impacts, and so recommendation is, actually just before, and then just the final thing to draw members' attention to is our kind of update report there, and we have a couple of new comments. One comment from Councillor Crofton in support of the application. We've got another comment from a member of the public just raising concerns around camping that's happened at the farm previously. And I think the thing, what we've sort of highlighted is we are aware that camping has happened on the farm. We feel it's kind of separate to this planning application. It's not applied for as part of the application. It happens outside the red line area. And whilst there is that sort of toilet shower block, we don't feel that we feel that that is sort of justified in terms of the uses that are proposed on site. And so, if it's found that planning permission is required for the camping use, then the farm would need to make an application at a later, separate application at a later date to regularize that. But we feel it's sort of separate from this current application. Also, there's just kind of a couple of one change to condition 24. The applicants have requested that we just include reference to volunteers as well as staff, and as well as staff. So we feel that's a acceptable change to make. Just adds a bit more clarity. And the applicants have also requested that we change the time period for the holiday accommodation from I think at the moment it's worded as 28. People can stay up to 28 days, and they've asked to sort of extend that to 60 to 90 days, but we feel that that is a concern and not something we want to agree to, because it then leads to that block becoming more of a permanent type or seasonal type accommodation, perhaps a bit similar to the visitor staff accommodation in Barn 1. So we feel it's important to have a bigger, to have a shorter time period to create a sort of clear distinction between those different types of accommodation. All the other matters are as in the committee report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Steve. There will be, I'm sure, some points that will come back to you, but I think we'll move on to public speakers. So I'm notified that we have either actually or potentially two speakers against, and they are Sonia Day and Mr. Peter Nat. I'm sure it's been explained to you that if you do both speak, you have to share 3 minutes. So I'm sure you've discussed it with each other and you know what you're going to do, but so it's just sort of very clear. So if depending on how you're going to go about this, could you either one of you, if it's only going to be one of you, or both of you, if it's going to be both of you, can you come down and plonk yourselves, please, in the public speaking chair? Okay, it's going to be the two of you. Super. That's okay. And don't do anything until I've just given you the rules of engagement as well. Okay. So this is standard practice. So you've got 3 minutes to share. The 3 minutes will start the minute you press the little button on the microphone. If you are still speaking at 3 minutes, in the nicest way, we will cut you off. So just make sure you're ready. And then when you're ready, press the red button and you've got 3 minutes. Well, the clock will be set to 3, and if it gets to starts at 3 and gets down to 0, or whichever way around it is, you'll be cut off. So it's up to you how you share your 3 minutes. So when you just press the button, and then you're away.
Right. Ardley is a small village in a conservation area with a number of grade 1 and 2 listed buildings. It has very poorly maintained access roads with limited passing on single track roads, which are prone to flooding and surface damage. The village has seen an increase in heavy goods vehicles and careless driving due to people who are unaware of the dangers of the lane with a speed limit of 60. Church Farm already has a cafe and shop and other retail units and workshop and offices and camping and cabins, which are currently under planning investigation. This has brought a lot of traffic to what was once a quiet, peaceful area, and the quiet road is now really busy. This is not limited to vehicles, but cyclists, walkers, and vulnerable road users who have no provision for off-road walking, with one fatal accident earlier this year, which wasn't in Ardley, it was in, but it's in the area. Ardley needs a clearer picture as to the purpose of Church Farm continued expansion and the consequences. To expand the holiday venue, maybe it will include caravans. This increase more dangers of caravans are bigger than single lane. To expand residential housing with further increase in years to come, which is a greater strain on Ardley infrastructure. To develop the business retail park will increase volume of heavy goods vehicles on Ardley roads. And could the planning committee needs to consider if this expansion is viable for this little village?
Right. My name is Peter Nat, and I'm the Road Safety and Access Officer of the British Horse Society for this area. Ardley is a rural village which is situated between Stevenage and Buntingford and is accessed by 3 narrow country roads which have high embankments, blind bends, a national speed limit of 60 miles an hour and no pavements. Local horse riders and horse-drawn carriage drivers use these country roads to exercise their horses and also to reach the local bridleways. Horse riders and carriage drivers are classified as vulnerable road users and need to be considered in this planning application, which will cause an increase in vehicles using the local roads. According to DEFRA's Equestrian Passport Agency, there are 605 horses kept in the SG2 postcode, which is the same postcode as Church Farm Ardley. The equestrian industry is a major contributor to the local economy, and it was estimated by the British Equestrian Trade Association in 2021 that each horse owner spends £5,548 per horse into the local economy, supporting a large number of businesses, including vets, physiotherapists, farriers, farmers, tack and feed shops, equestrian centres and stables. The equestrian industry is the second largest land-based industry to farming in the United Kingdom and is worth £8 billion to the economy and employs 85,000 people. As regards Hertfordshire, the Equine Horse Passport database indicates
Mr. Nat, and we're going to stop you. I'm afraid that's 3 minutes, but you did pretty well. You've got quite a lot in there. So thank you both. If you'd now like to go back and sit in the gallery, please. You're very welcome to leave that with us. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mel. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, we now have a speaker in favour. This is Mr. Tim Waygood. I believe that Mr. Tim Waygood is the applicant. Yes. So, Mr. Waygood, the rules are exactly the same for you, except because you're on your own, you get all of 3 minutes. Time starts when you press the button, and if you are speaking at 3 minutes, as you've just seen, we will stop you. So, in your own time.
Hi, I'm Tim Waygood. I run Church Farm, which is unique. Established in 2007, we run farm to fork, visitor, hospitality and social care enterprises. We are a place for people and wildlife. We have restored ancient fields and hedges. There are now 5 new woods, 5 ponds, soft fruit, horticulture, a walnut orchard and a heritage orchard growing apples, damsons, gages, plums, quince, medlar, cherry, crabapple and pears. We grow over 40 varieties of vegetables and farm every type of animal and poultry: cattle, pigs, sheep, goats, laying hens, turkeys, geese and ducks. This unique ecological approach has people at its heart. Visitors eat the food produced on the farm, in the cafe, the pub we run from the shop, and we deliver weekly farm food boxes. We run education courses and run a care farm. This social care employs 30 people, supporting over 50 people with physical and mental health difficulties who can help. Everyone can meaningfully contribute. We also host tenants from vodka making to crafts and furniture making. The sheer variety of farming and allied enterprises enables us to attract students and, importantly for us, volunteers from the UK, Europe and further afield. This application is to redevelop the dilapidated hub. It was formerly occupied by Motive Action Events, who 20 years ago employed over 140 people there. This company is now 5% of its former size, and over the past 16 years, the space has been taken up by the diversified enterprises. To improve this brownfield, we have consulted with everyone in the parish, shaping plans with ideas and input from local people. Holiday accommodation will support the cafe, shop and pub throughout the year. Meetings and event space will enable us to continue to host education and events that have supported the farm financially since 1987. Retail and offices for existing tenants will sustain employment. Staff, student and volunteer accommodation will replace the current expensive to maintain and heat situation. The houses will help finance the project. The diversified rural enterprises support over 50 paid jobs at Church Farm. As you will see from the planning portal, this application has had overwhelming support from the people living in the parish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Waygood. Thank you. Okay. Oh, yes. Carolyn, can you just switch the light off? Thank you very much indeed. Thanks. Okay. So that was very helpful. Various points made there, which we'll come back to as discussion progresses. But if members have got any comments or observations, I've got, just in order I saw the hands: David Andrews, Terence Beckett and Tim. Not much of a bus service in Ardley, so I can't comment on timetables, regrettably, Chairman. I do apologise. Comprehensive conditions, construction management plan. I'm very aware, personally very aware of the roads around Ardley, and in particular past the church, past the pub, and up to the school. In fact, my children went to that school, and a thoroughly good school it was too, and I sincerely hope it still is. The construction management plan does refer to timing of construction activities to avoid school pickup and drop-off times. I really can't overemphasize how important that is. Construction traffic going up there between probably 8 o'clock and perhaps 9:15 is going to be very challenging, and likewise, of course, during the course of the afternoon. I'm not cited on the current arrangements, but certainly 20 years ago, when my brood were last there, school lunch was taken in the village hall, which means they have to walk down the lane, cross the road and go into the village hall that's on the village green. If that's the case, then I would really encourage officers when they're looking at the construction management plan to factor that in, talk to the school. I'm totally sure that the applicants are very aware of this, but equally they'll probably be very welcome that sort of attention. So it's not just pick up and drop off, it's also luncheon arrangements and other arrangements that require the children to leave the school, because the minute they're out of the school grounds, they are exposed. Thank you. Thanks, David. Terence.
Thank you, Chair. I really wanted to be positive as we're coming to the end of our tenure, but it is quite difficult. So I'm a little bit confused, to be honest, and I'm really sorry, Steve. The first time we go toe to toe in a meeting, but I can't decide whether this is a full application or an outline application with a lack of detail we've got around building physics and sustainability. I mean, I understand that there is point 7 is building sustainability measures prior commencement to the groundworks. Details of sustainability measures to be incorporated have got to be passed via officers. And whilst I have extremely high regard of our officers, there have been very few applications that have passed through this committee where we've not argued over the level of sustainability measures and disagreed with the officers about the level that we should be going for. And I strongly feel that those measures should have been presented by the applicant to us here so that we can actually look at them and decide the levels of energy efficiency, water, and the other issues. And partially because, and you won't know this, that's the area I work in. I'm a specialist in sustainability and construction. And I just feel it's really light. And I find really, in my own personal opinion, there's not enough information there for me to determine whether this application should go ahead. And that's not without saying that this is obviously clearly a really good, valuable project for the area. But I think it's come to us too early.
Thank you, Terence. I think there were others, but Tim got in first, so it's your go, Tim.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a question also really about traffic and traffic movements. Could I have some explanation or some clarity on how the access and egress of traffic to this site is going to work out? Particularly interested in the bridle way to the south of the farm where it connects into School Lane. Is that a road? Will it become a road if it isn't a road already? And how will the residents of that road, including the school, be protected? And just following on from that, we've been told that there's a national speed limit applying in the village. Can we approach HCC and discuss that to see if it could be if a speed limit could be introduced?
Thanks very much, Tim. Okay, Steve. So that's your first batch of questions. See what you've got to say, please.
So yeah, in terms of construction management plan, noted. I guess that's something we can pick up with county highways, and to bear in mind with the you know, when that comes forward to get discharged, we could possibly include some mention of that in the wording of the condition, maybe.
If I might just come in, I don't need to speak for David, perfectly capable of speaking for himself, but I think David is making, the point David is making is that he would want a tighter condition, and something makes express reference to lunchtimes as well, I think. So I think he's making a point that would fall to us to deal with by way of a condition.
Yeah, I think that's something we could do. Yeah. And then in terms of the sustainability measures, I think, there is the sort of sections in the report on these issues. I mean, there are, in terms, the applicants have set out their kind of intentions in their planning statement, and there's some sort of warm words around, kind of a fabric first approach, and the kind of, I suppose, like the sort of ethos of the farm, how they want to make it a sort of sustainable development. There is not, a large amount of detail in, they're not sort of committing to a, specific kind of levels of carbon reduction, say, or kind of BREEAM, but they are, they do make mention of, kind of measures to improve building efficiency, and on the face of, but I think, that we feel that goes far enough in terms of meeting our policies. Our policies don't require a specific level of carbon reduction. They sort of ask the applicants to think about it and kind of show how they have thought about it and what they can do. So our feeling is that we can look again at the details when those come in, but and hopefully that will show, kind of embed some good sort of design principles in terms of sustainability. But we didn't feel that we did have the sort of policy justification to kind of say, it should be certain level of carbon reduction and so on.
So again, if I can come in, it's exactly the same. I don't need to speak for Terence, perfectly clear. I speak for himself. But I suspect that answer wouldn't have satisfied Terence, because obviously essentially what he's saying is, to use different language, that what it says in the report about sustainability is woolly, and Terence is looking for some certainty. So on the basis that the report says what it says, it does seem to me that the question which then comes up is that, well, okay, if we were to grant permission based on the report as it stands, could we attach some form of conditionality that will require appropriate details, re-sustainability to be provided, and potentially, I think probably what's in your mind is that would come back to this committee for sign off. Is that I'm reading your mind right, Terence?
Thanks, Chair. Well, ideally, I'd like to see it now, and I'd like them to commit to a figure to say this is what we plan to do, and this is the level that we intend. We've had no application come through here that hasn't had that in the last 4 years, and certainly we've got 4 huge, decent-sized commercial buildings there, but we've got 3 houses, and I don't know how they're going to deal with overheating, how they're going to safeguard the future of the residents of those houses, and we have a policy around sustainability. We have a supplementary planning document, which whilst isn't enforceable right now, applicants are well-minded to actually appeal as far as close as they can to that, to have an easy ride through this committee. And I'd like to think that'll carry on next year or this year as well.
So again, if I might just come back in, I mean, Victoria might want to speak, I think.
Yeah.
But you can see the point, can't you? So to repeat Terence's point, which is there to be made, is that the report isn't greatly specific on the sustainabilities. There's something in the report, but Terence is saying it could be a lot more specific. How do we go from where we are now to where we might want to be? Victoria or Richard?
Sorry, I just want to deal with the point about bringing the condition back to committee. Can't do that because it's delegated to Sarah as head of planning to deal with, so you can't come back to this committee.
Just picking up on the other side of it. So the report sets out at a high level some of the measures which could be used. Condition 7 in the report pack sets out a prior to commencement condition, prior to above ground works condition, to require those details to be submitted to us, and it sets out a specific list of items which we want to see happen from a carbon savings perspective. Completely understand where you're coming from, councillor, and this isn't the first time we've had this conversation, but it is the case that the policies at the moment don't set a target as to a certain percentage reduction or BREEAM excellence or the like, as Steve has said, and so given that position, that is why the condition doesn't set a specific target. National guidance around the use of conditions is that you should use conditions where you can to make developments acceptable, which otherwise wouldn't be. Yes, there isn't a full list of exactly what measures are going to be proposed in the scheme at the moment, but it's entirely appropriate to use a condition to control that in accordance with that national guidance, unless there are some specific site-specific or technical reasons why that might not be appropriate and why that condition could not be met. But in a site like this, there are a number of different technologies and techniques which can be used to follow that fabric first approach. And so we are comfortable using a condition to control those measures.
Just going to give you a chance to come back if you want to, Terence.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Richard, but I'm not satisfied by it. I mean, it wouldn't be difficult for the applicant to identify what level of savings they could achieve. The term fabric first, whilst as a principal, I understand. I was in the multi-meeting at BRE that came up with that phrase when I was working there. And it's been bandied around willy-nilly ever since. And without figures and facts to tell me what the air tightness is going to be, to tell me what they intend on levels of insulation, what the demand will be of the building and how they plan to meet that demand, we can't make a decision on this committee, I don't believe, on just how sustainable those buildings will be. Whether we have a policy, we don't need to necessarily tell them how sustainable they need to be, but I believe they need to tell us how sustainable they plan to be.
Okay, we'll keep moving. So Steve, Richard, if you could come back on Tim Page's comments, please.
Yeah, so in terms of traffic, again, you know, there is some sort of detail on that in the report. The transport assessment that's been prepared by the applicant considers that there would be a reduction in vehicle movements compared to the as a result of the proposal, because you've got a reduction in floor space. So, you know, that's a sort of positive in terms of kind of traffic and vehicle movements through the village. In terms of the sort of accesses, I think the intention has always been that the sort of the northern access onto Moor Green Road, that's going to be the main access into and out of the development. I think, you know, that there is that sort of access at the bottom that is going to be for sort of kind of emergency situations. It's not intended to be a kind of you know, a frequently used access. I think also to bear in mind the county highways have sort of recommended a number of conditions around that access, and some works to be done to improve the situation there, including a sort of provision of a footway and surfacing of that, and bollards as well on the verge to prevent sort of, you know, vehicles going onto the verge. So, I mean, and then in terms of the sort of speed limit, I don't think that's something we can control necessarily. I think it's, you know, it's up to county highways, and I know they have a sort of speed management team or group that would set the sort of, you know, speed limit changes. So I don't think it's something that we can really directly influence.
I think, Chair, if I may, if the highways team felt it were an issue for this scheme, they would have said that in their comments, and they would have either been saying it's unacceptable or it requires those measures. As the committee knows, a planning application can't solve an existing problem. It's just if it creates or exacerbates an issue, then it's relevant. You can use conditions or obligations to do that. But the advice from county highways is that this actually will result in a reduction in traffic. Clearly, there will be temporary works around construction matters, but they haven't advised that that's necessary.
If I could just take the opportunity just to remind both of you officers, I know you've got this, but one of the speakers against was obviously expressing concern about traffic volumes, and I think it's fair to say that the other speaker was concerned about the impact of traffic on the horse community. Now, clearly, we've all heard what you just said, and it's a perfectly legitimate thing for you to say, Richard, but do you want to say, or Steve, anything further about the traffic issue and the impact on the equestrian community in the area?
Well, I think the equestrian kind of comment is in relation to, you know, should there be other sort of improvements to kind of the routes that should be delivered as part of this application, and you know, we did receive those comments, considered them as part of the assessment, and I think our view was that, you know, there is obviously some differences of opinion, but the county highways have, you know, accepted the kind of recommendations of the or conclusions of the transport assessment that there would, you know, there's not going to be a big increase in vehicle movements, and therefore, you know, we don't really see how, you know, any sort of measures that we ask for. They have to be sort of justified and necessary to mitigate the impacts that would come from a development, and so we don't really see that there is scope to kind of make, you know, to make a request for other improvements along the lines suggested, given that you know, there isn't going to be a significant increase in sort of vehicle movements.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm looking at the Ben, Sally, Ruth. That's a batch of 3, and we'll come back to others once we've got through the next 3. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I think, I mean, I've been up there and I know the site at the moment is pretty tired, and it kind of, a lot of it's underwater, I think, in the winter. So I think from the look of it, I think this could become a far better site and would bring a lot of benefits to the village, and I think it's positive in that respect. But I think coming back to what Terence was saying, I think it's incredibly important that we do get that basic level of information with our applicant, with our information document set. Those questions have to be asked of applicants. They may not want to answer them, but and I would have thought in this case, given that the farm is very much sustainable focused, that the applicant would be very keen to make those buildings as sustainable as possible. One thing that puzzled me was, I think the design statement mentioned air source heat pumps, and the condition mentions gas boilers. So obviously there's been some discussion of that. You know, I think you've probably said about as much as all you can say on the subject, but I do think it's really important. I was pleased to see the condition, bird boxes, bat boxes, swift boxes. That's very positive. Do we know about the EV chargers? So there's EV chargers. Are they going to be open for the public? Is that something that the village would benefit from, or are they purely for use by sort of staff? I just wondered if you could tell me that.
I think, was it Sally next? Sally.
Yes, quite a few of my questions have slowly been resolved, but just to conclude, I remember this site starting in 2007, and I've seen the work that social services do, county council, the disability, children going to see animals, introduction into the rural community, and it's first class. I'm aware latterly, as you said, it's a bit tired, and this looks like a nice tidying up of everything. So these are just things during the conversation that I just want officers just to pick off from my mind. I did notice on page 11, class EA, wood burning stove. So it's funny that some of the discussion about just what they do have in mind, bearing in mind all the fuss about wood burning stoves at the moment, is there. But the issues for me also is the infrastructure. From Cotteridge to Ardley, the road is not special, never has been. Horses, whether it's horses, cyclists, and I do know the incident where there's been a death last year, and animals. You've also got, if it's a working farm, you've also got tractors. And tractors are competing terribly with the public at the moment, people who cycle and move around. So whether there would be a thought of passing bays or anything like that between the major roads into Ardley is something for highways to seriously consider in the future. I wouldn't say that they need to consider it because of this development, because actually I think, as it's said, you know, the floor space is less, there's a reduction, but I think there's already an issue there that highways has not particularly addressed. So that if you have horses and animals and cyclists and people and tractors, you have a perfect storm. So That's just my take on what we've been hearing, and my only real concern is the oak tree. Because the photographs show that it's quite established. You mentioned you'd come back to it later, which always is a worrying thing. You know, oak trees, they take 100 years to thrive, 100 years to survive, and 100 years to die. And I just wondered with this one, what actually is going to happen to it? If you could just clarify that. Thank you.
I'm a bit concerned, so I'm not quite sure I remember who the third speaker was. It was you, wasn't it, Ruth? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think, well, I actually had two questions. Well, I had several, but Sally's just asked the one about the tree. But I can also say, I was also going to add, was there a TPO on the tree? I had a question about camping, which you also answered for me. But one of my other concerns is they talked about how many businesses they have at the moment and the employment numbers, and they want, hopefully those businesses will go back. But what's going to happen to them while the buildings are demolished? Where do those businesses go? Where would their employment? Because I just have a feeling once they've moved, will they come back? So what's happening to those companies and those businesses while the construction's going on?
This committee asks good questions, doesn't it? Okay. So, Steve, Richard, where you go?
Thank you, Chair. So just to deal with those questions, yeah, I mean, in terms of sustainability, I don't think we've got much more to add in terms of what we can require based on the policies we have. Just to clarify, yeah, I take your point about the condition that was requested from Environmental Health about gas-fired boilers is a sort of standard condition that they put on just to try and mitigate kind of air quality impacts. I suppose, I put that on not because, because we just don't know at the moment what the sort of heating and cooling strategy for the building is and whether it would have gas-fired boilers. Certainly, I think we're reaching the point where it's getting less and less likely now because, when you got the sort of building regs changes and future homes requirements for the residential at least, then that is going to mean switching over to air source heat pumps pretty soon, I thought. But I put on that condition just in case, because we don't know at the moment. In terms of the electric vehicle charging, the site is, I think the car parking, is predicated on kind of meeting the needs of the development. So I would have thought in the first instance it would be sort of available for users, but I guess if the if the farm management decide came to some sort of agreement with the community, and I know it's a sort of community interest company, I would have thought that there might be potential for something like that. But I think as far as the planning application goes, it's pretty difficult to sort of secure it. In terms of the wood burning stoves, I think I'm taking that to mean around the sort of gas-fired boiler point, which is, yeah, we've included it in a just in case sort of situation really, but it may not come to there being gas-fired boilers, but we put the condition on just in case. In terms of sort of passing bays, again, I think it goes back to the transport assessment and what is necessary to kind of mitigate the impacts of the development. And we don't feel that there are impacts that are coming from this scheme that would justify having, sort of requiring passing bays to be provided, at certain distances from the site and so on. That's not being requested from county highways. So, we don't feel that we can ask for that. In terms of the oak tree, so yeah, I think on some of the plans you could see it's sort of really close to the boundary of the site. Perhaps could we bring back we've got it here. Yeah, okay. So yeah, the oak tree is sort of here. Currently, at the moment, there's large areas of sort of hard standing concrete immediately in that root protection area of the tree. Also buildings and things. So that's going to be removed from the scheme and then replaced with residential gardens. So it'll be sort of soft permeable ground. So that should improve the kind of prospects for the tree in the long term. I think we've included a condition requiring tree protection measures during construction. So so we'll look at the details that they provide that should be, you know, sort of standard measures to kind of protect the tree whilst the works are going on. And I think that
There was a specific, which is the tree subject to a TPO, do we know?
oh yes, so we don't, you know, I don't think it's a TPO tree. I think but it's in the conservation area, so it's protected with by the conservation area status. Oh yes, and the other point was around employment businesses. What would happen to those if they during the construction? I think, you know, we don't have much information on that, unfortunately. You know, we can't sort of guarantee that they will come back. You know, I suppose it's up to sort of businesses. There might be potential for a sort of phasing in the development so that you get, you know, sort of they can stay in some buildings on site until the barns are built and then move into the new buildings. We could possibly, you know, consider, if this was a big, you know, major concern for members, we could possibly consider, you know, requiring a sort of phasing plan to try and sort of make sure that there's perhaps some overlap between existing buildings and new ones coming up. Thank you.
Sorry, did you get that, Tony, Ian, David, in that order, please? Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. There's a couple of points of clarification I would like. In condition 14, you talk about cycle parking being agreed prior to occupation. However, at the end of that condition, you say long stay cycle parking will be fully secure and lockable, but you don't mention the short stay. So I'd like to think that short stay parking has the same condition put on it. Can we amend that condition together? That's one point. The other one was on the drawing, schematically, it shows like a block paving surface on the roads. And does that imply that that is a permanent surface? Because when I went down there, it was quite flooded the site, and I appreciate it was compressed clay and hogging more than likely, but have any tests been done about the permeability of the ground? And the last thing I wanted to make, I agree with officers. I think 28 days in 12 months is the right thing to go for. I've had experience of this on another site, and frankly, once it gets too long, the site owner is liable to, they become residential parts. If you could just clarify those for me.
Thanks, Tony. I would take Ian, wasn't it? Ian next. I've got you up next to bat.
Yes, although I've got multiple points as usual. So
Okay, well, that's fine. We'll hold you. We'll come back to David. David, do you want to come in again?
Yes, if I may, I've finally found the highways, the comments from the highways, and I was a bit confused to start with because it was a couple of days ago that I looked at this last. And of course, on the report, all the pages are paginated with a completely different report number. So if you use that number, you go nowhere fast. In fact, you go to Much Haddam. But I digress. Which was a challenge for initially. I don't think highways have understood the challenge posed by the school. I don't want to over egg it, but the simple fact is a great number of young people, very small people, very precious people, move up and down School Lane during the course of the day. And all highways have acknowledged is they'd like it kept clear, or they'd like the construction traffic to stay away during pick up and drop off times. Now, pick up and drop off to me suggests motorist. They're not quite as precious and fragile as children are. And I'm worried about the exposure because my children didn't get dropped off and picked up. And I suspect quite a few others don't. But I'm particularly concerned around lunchtimes. They go down a lane in a crocodile. They've got to cross the road. I think we need to make sure that highways recognise that and we factor that in. It need not be onerous. The applicant is perfectly recognizant of this, and I'm sure that, like us, they don't want any challenges. But I don't think highways have recognised that in their report.
Okay, thanks, David. I'm going to ask officers to respond to David and Tony now, and then we'll come back to you, Ian. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in terms of the cycle parking, the plans sort of show an area for cycle parking, but they don't show how, you know, the sort of racks that will be there, or, you know, whether it, you know, the kind of whether it's covered, or the sort of how secure it's going to be. So we want to see the sort of details of that, really. You know, so is it Sheffield stands, and, you know, kind of, is there going to be a, you know, secure gate in front of it, and so on. We don't normally require that for sort of, we'd want that for long stay, as in, you know, if you work on site for 7 hours or 8 hours, you want somewhere secure and covered to put your bike. But short stay, you know, normally means sort of, you know, if you're visiting quickly, you know, and you want somewhere more convenient, and you're not going to leave your bike there so long. So normally it still needs to be secure, you know, as in, you know, a Sheffield stand or something like that would normally be most appropriate. But we wouldn't feel it's necessary for that it to be in a lockable enclosure, because, you know, if it's someone that's visiting one of the retailers, say, or the workshops or the offices for an hour or half an hour, it, you know, it wouldn't be sort of necessary for them to be, you know, have go through the faff of getting, you know, access to the enclosure and putting it in to take it out again. It would normally see it as acceptable to be able to just lock it to a Sheffield stand outside the front door. So that's sort of, so we'd look for a sort of a bit of a balance between the two, really. So that's why the conditions worded like that. In terms of permeability, it is permeable paving is proposed. The drainage strategy has been revised at the request of the lead local flood authority. So they're now looking to have a permeable paving through the site, and then that would drain and be collected below the in the base layer, and then that will discharge into a pond, which is kind of outside the red line area, but elsewhere in the farm. So and as part of that drainage strategy, they need to sort of do, you know, some testing of, and kind of rule out that they can't kind of drain infiltrate into the ground and so on. So there has been some kind of assessment of that as part of that drainage strategy. And then in terms of the school kind of school times, sorry, I wasn't, is this in relation to the construction traffic again? Yeah. 35% versus trial, that might be ideal. Yeah, I think it's, so, I mean, we can certainly add it to the condition. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if you wanted to come back there, Tony.
I hear what you say about the parking for to short stay, but yeah, I didn't read the store, but what I'm wanting in that condition, if you're mentioning long stay parking, I think we need to mention that we require secure, lockable parking for bikes and short stay, because they walk otherwise, and it's ridiculous to have that situation. If you could come back.
Yeah, I mean, so I think, you know, we are that condition as worded, it would sort of require the sort of details of a secure, you know, they have shown a space which potentially can be quite, you know, quite secure and lockable, but and we'll get the details of that. We'll also get the details of, you know, the kind of other you know, kind of Sheffield stands or something elsewhere. I'm not, are you sort of seeking?
No, what I'm thinking is that if you mention long stay cycle parking to be fully secure and lockable store, we want to mention short stay cycle storage needs to be lockable and secure.
Okay.
Is that can be put in the condition?
Okay.
It's a nonsense to mention one and not the other.
Oh, yeah, we can make sure that, you know, the where it the condition references visitor cycle parking, that it's secure. And
very good, thank you. Okay, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, some general comments. It's interesting to see this is one of the very few planning applications we receive where there are more comments in support than there are against, which I think is noteworthy. The business certainly seems an appropriate one in a rural area. And it's good to see it seeking to improve its buildings, because I think certainly when one's visited the site, the existing ones could not be described as architecturally distinguished in any way. So those are very positive points about this application, I think. First, I wanted to check on condition 24 and the planned update. The principle, I think, is right, but I think in the process, possibly the wording is slightly wrong, in that it's proposed to change it to volunteering or studying with in the agricultural and associated rural enterprises. I think the wording should remove the word either with or in before we accept it. Hopefully that's acceptable. Secondly, on the going back to the sustainability aspects, I do think it would be good to have more clarity on what exactly is planned here. Obviously, it's difficult in terms of certain conditions, but in particular, are air source heat pumps planned? Is that definite? And I think we would really ideally want to rule out gas boilers altogether. We're seeing that on quite a number of sites, and indeed, I'm not even sure whether, and I'll ask the question, whether gas is actually used on this site at the moment, because it's by no means a given in many of these rural villages. And if there is no gas supply to the site at all, then I would have thought it was far more appropriate to either omit condition 34 altogether or replace it by one that gas-fired boilers will not be used. Third question relates to the comment on camping that was made, and I must admit, I may have missed something in the earlier discussion, but I am still somewhat confused here, because it seemed to be suggesting in the officer's reply that camping isn't particularly happening, or that there's unauthorized camping and doesn't matter. But on the other hand, paragraph 812 actually says it's currently an established visitor attraction which draws in both day visitors and camping overnight stays, although camping only takes place for limited periods during the summer. And it actually mentions as a positive fact the proposed toilet shower block would also support camping stays at the farm. And yet we're told in the officer comments on the additional representations that that some aspect of it is unauthorized camping and is subject to an enforcement action. So I'd really like some clarification on, is any camping allowed and under what circumstances? Thank you.
Thanks, Ian, very much. Steve, Richard.
So in terms of condition 24, I think we could do that change that you've suggested. In terms of the gas supply to the village, I'm afraid I don't know whether there is gas supply to the village. I think the condition is just a sort of standard one, in that it sort of says that if gas-fired boilers are proposed, that they should meet a sort of certain standard. So yeah, I mean, I would hope that there aren't going to be any gas-fired boilers if there is gas supply to the village, but we can't say that for sure at the moment, because we don't have an energy strategy that's submitted with the application. We don't have what the sort of heating and cooling methods will be for the building, so we can't say for sure. I mean, it's possible that we could amend the condition to say no gas-fired boilers, and that may not be a problem. But
if I might just come in there again, I don't need to speak for Ian, but effectively that's what Ian is suggesting, isn't it? He's basically saying, and he's not the only voice in effect saying this, which is, why are we even contemplating gas boilers? Can we not simply say no gas boilers?
Well, we don't have a policy that sort of says that. That's why, really. That is why we haven't sort of suggested it. We have a policy that says, it talks in sort of broader terms about building sustainability and embedding kind of sustainable design but it doesn't say, you know, it's not prescriptive in terms of the technologies that you use, or, you know, the kind of the level of carbon reduction or the sort of BREEAM level that should be achieved.
With the committee's permission, I'm just going to come in again. It's obvious from the conversation, isn't it, that there are concerns in the room about the sustainability side of this application. I think broadly the mood of the room is that there's quite a bit about this application that is well received. It's tidying up a site, etc., etc. But there is concern in the room about the sustainability side of the thing. Ben put a position in quite an emphatic way, which is that the applicant must tell us what he has in mind. And we can see where you can see where you're coming from. That's fine. But the question for us is if that is correct. When we have to operate within the bounds of what we are entitled to insist on and what we're not entitled to insist on. If we are entitled to insist on, if you like, full disclosure of sustainability at this stage, Ben and others' points are relevant. But if we're not entitled to do it, well, we have to face up to that, don't we? So I would like some guidance on that, and I think there's some body language in the room that everybody else would as well.
Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome.
Let's see what I say first. So the message from the committee is heard loud and clear around the appropriate and proper weight being given to sustainability. It is one of the founding principles of the planning system, and it is something which needs to be taken very seriously. This is a scheme which is to modernise buildings. I think everyone would accept that, at least in general terms, modern buildings are more energy efficient in a variety of ways. The applicant made this application and provided what was necessary in order, in their eyes, to show that it complied with policy. We in making a recommendation, you in determining it, need to decide whether or not it accords with the development plan, unless there's other material considerations to indicate otherwise. The policies in the development plan on climate change and on sustainability talk about encouraging the use of these measures and the uptake of things to reduce the carbon impact of the scheme of schemes, and various other allied things around water use and biodiversity and things like that. Given that that's the position, we have a scheme in front of us where it's setting out that it is possible for that to happen. It doesn't go into detail. There can be quite good reasons why it doesn't go into detail at this stage. The detailed construction design of these buildings isn't normally done at planning stage, and so there can be different approaches which are best or optimal depending on exactly what construction methodologies are used, and so that can mean that different renewable or low carbon technologies are more or less appropriate as a result of it. It is also the case that, you know, this application was made when it was made. It's up for determination hopefully now, but it might not be implemented for 3 years. The energy situation in terms of the carbon in the electricity grid and things like that could be quite different from that from at that point. And so there are good reasons why, in our opinion at least, why the details of these matters are left for conditions, and that's quite standard. I do understand what committee are saying though about the amount of information which is present in the scheme at this point, and that's understood, and that's something which officers will reflect on. Coming on to the air quality or the boiler point, that is a standard condition. Almost all schemes for housing include that condition, and that is as much about air quality as it is about anything else. There could be scenarios in the future where boilers are put into some of those residential buildings. That wouldn't require planning permission. Someone could just do that. You know, we can speculate as to what might happen about future gas supplies. I don't know whether or not there's a gas supply to the village. If the committee disagree that condition can be taken out, there isn't enough policy support for a condition saying thou shalt not have gas boilers. So I wouldn't recommend that committee went there. And so given that, we recommend that condition should be there so that if gas boilers do come along at some point in the future for whatever reason, there is a control there as to their quality and their impact on them. Sorry, I started to speak slightly in an animated fashion, but hopefully that makes it clear as to where that's come from. And we do think that it's appropriate that conditions are used to control the detail around the sustainability at a later point, because technologies do move on, and it may be some time before this is implemented.
Okay. Terence.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just come back on, before I make my next point, on Tony's point. And I'd like to see on the cycle stores secure and covered. So even the temporary ones are not out in the pouring rain when it's raining, because people won't use them if they're outside in the rain anyway. And generally, if you do look at the condition under BREEAM where cycle stores are done, they're usually visible, covered and secure. So don't necessarily need to be a cage as such, but certainly should be covered, I think, in all instances. I think I have a question for officers. I'm not letting this bone go. In what's changed or what's different about this application to every other application I've seen in the last 4 years, because this is the first time, aside from an outline planning application, where we've not had the level of detail that we're asking for this evening. And I'm going to counter Richard's comment and argument around technology moving on. I've kind of got the one development in Sawbridgeworth where they were really poor on their energy, but it was policy compliant, so we couldn't do anything about it. But yeah, because we know things move on, we know roughly where things are going. At the moment, I don't know in my determination whether this site will be future-proofed or whether it's just scraping through now, and by the time it actually gets built out, it's not going to be fit for purpose. It's actually going to be a retrograde step in terms of energy efficiency. Now, you're going to come back and go, well, that's the same for everything because things can move on and there's nothing we can do about that. But at least I have that information in front of me to make that determination and actually then just have a moan about it. Because at the moment, all I can moan about is the fact that you haven't told me whether I can moan about it or not. And so I'm moaning about it. And my proposal would be that we defer this development and it comes back with the appropriate information for the committee to make a decision or at least have sight. Now, whilst you say that they haven't got the design details, I get that. Bear in mind, I work on developments every day from pre-demolition audits right the way through. I'm a BREEAM AP and I was a director of BREEAM, so I've done this for like 15 years. There's nothing wrong in asking the applicant to commit to benchmark levels of minimum performance in certain areas and for them to say, well, we can do that. And then they design to fit that. Now, and whilst it may not be policy, I believe it's certainly within the ability and maybe remit is not the right word, but it's certainly within the ability of officers to encourage developments to become more sustainable, even if it's not, even if it's beyond what we ask for in policy. And that happens all the time, which is why we have the SPD. It happens all the time with developments I work on, where I'm the poacher and not the gamekeeper. And I think that, I will actually think it's come too early and I think it should be deferred.
All right, Terence, thank you very much. Yeah, I was going to come back to you, Ian, not least on the gas boiler condition point.
Thank you. Yes, it's, I take Terence's point about possibly deferring it. On the other hand, it's been an application that's been sort of considered in quite a lot of detail. Is that one missing piece of information sufficient to make it worth actually deferring it? I'm not convinced on that. What I would say is that I would like, I think I would like officers to take note that we do want to see this level of detail in applications. If it's not in applications as to what the energy source will be, whether gas is going to be used, things of that sort, they should be asking developers to provide that information, and it should be going into the officer's report or in the supplied information in future. I suspect that the applicant was not asked for that by officers, and it would seem a little unreasonable to me to actually defer this long-standing application on the basis of something that the applicant wasn't actually asked by officers to provide in more detail. I would hope also that the applicant is prepared to cooperate on this, and that they could perhaps provide additional information which could then be looked at by officers and delegated to the chair and vice chair of the committee to look at in the same way as certain types of conditions are delegated, and that could be maybe a provisional part of the of the Planning Commission if we were to choose to grant it. I think that also rolls in the point about gas boilers. I think I suspect one or two councillors might even on this committee might know whether Ardley has gas or not as a village. I could see a shake of a head from and it's all very well to say it may go down the line. Well, planning commissions, as far as I know, the standard condition is it should be begun within 3 years. I think it highly unlikely that government energy policy will have reversed completely within 3 years, or that gas suddenly gets laid on to this isolated village within 3 years. And so it does seem to me an unnecessary or inappropriate condition. And indeed, I'm not sure, although again, I may be recalling wrongly, whether I have seen that specific condition in all of the planning applications that have been submitted to us in the past. I don't recall seeing it in some of them. Again, I may be wrong, in which case I would stand corrected. But those are my views on that. And I'd also flag up that there is still the question about the definition of the camping to be covered.
Okay, so if we just do the camping point, please, and then we'll try and wrap things up and arrive at a conclusion. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so in terms of camping, we know that camping has taken place at the farm. Farms, you don't necessarily need planning permission to operate a temporary campsite. So we don't know whether that what has taken place was permitted development or whether it was, a sort of breach of planning control. That's something that the planning enforcement officer's looking at. But so there's no sort of actual enforcement action in train. There's no, no enforcement notice or anything. It's something we're looking at. What we do know is, there's no planning permission for camping. So if they were to try and, wanted a sort of permanent campsite on the farm, that would need planning permission. They would need to apply, for a separate application for that. I think, when you look at the plans and you see the sort of toilet and shower block, it's obviously sort of been designed with camping in mind. And so one of the things we had to ask ourselves was, well, if we grant planning permission for this block, does this mean that we're kind of giving, kind of encouragement to a unauthorized use? And we felt that we won't, because the block is useful for all the other uses that that is part of the planning application. The holiday lets, linen room that will serve the holiday lets, and laundry, and also toilets for visitors to general members of the public who are visiting the site. So it is of benefit, and so we ask, so we do feel it's acceptable as part of the application proposals. But what we're saying, what we wanted to make clear is, when this permission does not include any, is not a consent for any camping use, and that would need to be part of a separate application if it was required. Don't know if that helps.
Okay, right. Well, I think some things are reasonably clear. So just to try and do the things that are reasonably clear, and I'm looking around the room as always, people can, shake their heads if they wish to. I think we're all on board with David Andrews' points about construction, traffic management, schools, lunch times, concern for children. So I think we need something tighter in the conditions for that. I think we're all on board that we want secure provision both for long-term bicycles and short-term bicycles. And if we're going to go that far, why not have them covered? So I think we're all in the room okay with that. Looking at the additional representations note, I think everyone in the room is very content with the officer's suggestions in respect of conditions 24 and 25, save that re 24, you just need to sort out the typo. Where that leaves us is the theme of the evening, which is sustainability. Now, I just want to recite what I understand to be the advice from officers, and Victoria, as our legal officer, do please come in if I've got this wrong. My understanding of advice from officers is that the approach which has been taken in this report in terms of planning policy guidelines, etc., is proper. It's a proper and justifiable approach. I'm only going to come back to this because it just points up the issue. And my understanding on the advice given to us this evening is that it is not the case that the applicant must provide the sort of sustainability information which in particular Terence has been talking about. So I'm just going to pause there. Is my understanding on those couple of points correct? Okay, right. So on that basis, the application as it is put forward to us is a correct and properly reported application. It might be that a member or whatever of this committee would have liked more information, but the absence of that information does not in any way undermine or negate the validity of the application. Okay, right. So in that case, we've got an application that we can make some sort of decision on. So the next thing, obviously, that was in the room is a suggestion that maybe we should defer. Now, if I might say from the chair, I think given the advice from officers, which I've recited and they confirm is correct, we do have an application here, re which it would be correct for us to make a decision. So we can do that, and we've identified the conditions that we want tightening up or whatever it may be. So if this committee were to want to defer, I would need someone to propose that, and of course someone to second, and then in turn for the committee to vote in favour of a deferral. So I leave that with the room. Okay, that's fine. You're going to propose? Yes, of course.
When we defer, are we not supposed to have a valid reason?
Well, that's a very good question, Ian. So let's see what Victoria, our legal officer's got to say about that.
You beat me to it, Councillor Kemp. So I was just going to come in, but before just say that I completely agree with what you said earlier about the reason for the deferral and the sustainability point not being a particularly sufficient reason from my perspective, from a legal perspective about deferral, because you actually have to ask what are you actually asking the applicant to do, bearing in mind what the planning officers have said, and the fact that there's no policy basis for asking for that information. So that's all that I would add on that. You have to have a real clear reason for deferring this decision. And also, obviously, if you defer, there is a risk that the applicant will apply for non-determination if it's outside the statutory timeframes to determine that application.
Okay, well done. Very, very good. David? My view on deferment is, unless there is a very, very good reason, we're actually here to make decisions, and deferment is not in and of itself a decision. There's nothing about this application that gives me undue concern. I've mentioned one or two things. I think the floor have as well. There are questions, but fundamentally, not to encourage the applicant to crack on and improve this site in this way is would be a mistake. I think we should. Okay. I would certainly happily vote for this. Okay. Well, we've all heard, and Sally, did you want to come in? Do come in, Sally, if you want to. Okay. Well, just a second. So I think I did have a proposal for a deferment. Well, hang on. So I didn't, because we didn't get there, Terence. At the time, I didn't get a seconder. If there is a seconder, will you just put your hand up, please? There may or may not be one, but no. Okay. So Terence, your proposal to defer does not move forward. So I've now got, I think, from Councillor Andrews, is this correct, David? A proposal to go forward with the application as it is presented to us, and that's just to repeat, that's with taking on board the officer's recommendations in respect of conditions 24 and 25 per the late reps, correcting the typo in condition 24, something with all due respect much tighter than we've got it at the moment: reconstruction, traffic and schools. Not just at the beginning and end of the day, lunch times, but in general. Bicycles, all bicycle provision to be secure and covered. And I think they are the conditions points we've got. Okay, so I've got a proposer. Are you seconding, Carolyn? Thank you very much. All those in... Oh, okay, that's fine. Okay, so Sally, you're the seconder. All those in favour of this application, please show a hand.
2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Okay, 10. Those against? Abstaining. One abstention. Okay, so thank you very much, committee. As always, it's extremely good discussion. So just to be formal and bear with me, we have just agreed to grant permission in respect of application 321-0498 FUL. Barn 1 offers accommodation and 6 units of overnight accommodation with 14 beds in total for staff, volunteers and students working on the farm site, Class EG. Barn 2, 12 self-contained holiday lodges, outbuilding for shower and laundry facilities, Class C3, but occupation restricted to short stays only. Barn 3, 3 retail workshops, Class EA, EG. Barn 4, learning and meeting event space with kitchen and 2 offices at first floor, Class F1A, F2B and Class EG. Erection of 3 dwellings, Class C3, widening of access and footpath and associated car parking provision. And all of that is at Church Farm, Moor Green Road, Ardleigh, Hertfordshire. Thank you all very much indeed. So to come back to the agenda, we've covered item 4. Item 5, as everybody knows, is items for reporting and noting. We don't vote on item 5. We just report and note. Similarly, item C is for reference. We don't vote on item 5C or 5B. That brings us on to item 6, urgent business. I'm unaware that there is any urgent business. So at 8:32, close the meeting. Thank you all very much indeed.